Welcome. This is the session on activism and advocacy, moving the dial on climate justice. And of course, I would like to start by acknowledging that we all meet on unceded Aboriginal land. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and welcome any First Nations people we have with us here today. My name's Julia Davis. I work at the Financial Rights Legal Center. I'm going to try very hard not to suck up too much oxygen in this presentation because we have some amazing speakers. But just to sort of set the scene, my role in this conversation is around insurance. And insurance has been talking about really climate change since the 90s. They have seen the numbers and it's been quite obvious. So it's been a part of this conversation for a long time. And at the Financial Rights Legal Center, we've operated a national insurance law service since 2007. And we take about 3,000 to 5,000 insurance legal advice calls a year. So we've got a pretty good handle on the consumer pain points when it comes to insurance. And I've been there for 12 years. So I'm a bit of an insurance law tragic myself. And when CLC New South Wales created a disaster planning network a couple years back, I was happy to jump on. I've been on there with Mel since the start. Earlier this year, we presented in a webinar as part of the Law and Justice Foundation's ongoing research into disaster-related legal needs. But even though my lens of this conversation is very focused on insurance, climate justice is obviously much broader than that. And I think we all recognize that it's really knowing that marginalized communities are going to get impacted disproportionately by climate change, and we all see it in our own communities. I feel like as a community legal sector in the last 5 years, we have all played a role, since the Black Summer fires. And I think we've all become really well versed in the complex and messy and long tail legal problems that our clients have after being impacted by an extreme weather event. But when I was asked to facilitate this, I really just kept running through my head. If we added up all of that legal support that we have provided to all of those clients across the state for years, can we say that we've moved the dial on this in a real way? Can we say that we've actually started to tackle the big and growing and terrifying problem that is on our doorstep with climate justice? I don't know. I don't know that we have. It's quite confronting, actually, when I think about the thousands of legal advices that we give every year to people trying to help them. And I feel like we do help them, but one at a time. Is that moving the needle? Are we actually affecting change in a real way? So this panel hopefully will help us answer that question, maybe even challenge us to start approaching our disaster-related legal work a little differently if we want to actually make an impact on some of the big challenges our communities now face. So over to the actual experts. We're going to start with Alison Marr, managing lawyer, family law at Hume Riverina. She's going to talk to us about the Climate Justice Field Guide. And then we're going to switch over to Angela Frimberger and Justine Emerson, who are going to talk to us about some incredible strategic litigation that's resulted in real policy change. And then finally, Dr. Georgina Woods, who's the head of research and investigations at Lock the Gate. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves a bit more fully than that. And over to you, Alison. Don't clap.
And we absolutely don't want to fall off the stage at the get-go. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to present on this beautiful country. If I might start. So my name's Alison Marr and I'm a principal lawyer at the Hume Riverina Community Legal Service. So my presentation really comes, we're fortunate to sit on the border. When I say fortunate, sometimes it's across the bear, but we also have a unique opportunity of looking across each state, and sometimes we replicate what works on the other state, or we learn from our own experiences. So yes, I'd just like to give my acknowledgement and to share my respects for elders past, present and emerging as well. So who are we? So, as I said, we're a cross-border service. We cover 17 local government areas, and you can see on that map that we go up around Wagga Wagga, and we spread out to Deniliquin. We spend a fair bit of time in the car, but we also cross into Victoria, and we go into the regions, including up to Mansfield, out to Corryong. And many of those communities were actually impacted or were severely impacted by the Black Summer bushfires in 2019, 2020. So what did we see? So in 2019, 2020, we really had to mobilise into action, and we knew that as a community we needed to get out to where people were and to meet people where they were at. We were looking at pre-existing legal and social needs and what access people had to services. And what did we learn? We learned through our work in the communities that we needed to be flexible and we needed to be adaptive. We needed to rely on specialist support, knowing that we, as a small community legal service, certainly did not have the answers to every legal problem. We had to work in partnership. So we knew the benefit of working with those people around us who were connected to the communities, and we used their knowledge, and we took that knowledge and we worked with our other services and community legal centres, but specialist legal services, to bring our knowledge and to assist those who were impacted directly by those fires. We knew that we had to work in a trauma-informed way. And what we saw was that the trauma that was triggered through the community exacerbated the many legal and non-legal issues that were experienced. We know that working with people, that long tail of the legal issues which arise through bushfires and other disaster events, what we saw and what we still know is that we're still assisting people who were initially affected by those fires. So how we did this, we were working with people in the neighbourhood. We worked and we built trust with those organisations and those people. We worked with the councils. We worked with other support services who were providing wraparound support. And then we worked with our legal services and pro bono provided as well, which included council and again, the specialist legal services. So I'm really pleased to present to you, and if you have had the opportunity to jump online, you might have actually seen this field guide. So it's a comprehensive work, but when I say comprehensive, it brings together our learnings from what we have experienced and what others have experienced since the Black Summer fires. And by no means is this a comprehensive document in terms of what we may experience, what we will experience in the future. So it's a point in time, and it's brought together our knowledge, but again, what can be contributed to in the years that come. If there are some copies of this lying around somewhere, but I've also got a copy here, and you can jump online, and it's through the Federation of the Community of Legal Services in Victoria. And there's a great raft of people who have been able to contribute to this booklet. So what I might do is, I was hoping there would be a few copies around here, but certainly I'm able to provide you with the code, and you can go in and you can actually download this booklet as well. It's very informative. It brings together research. It brings together work that has been put together by the Federation, who were able to actually employ a lead person to pull together all the services who contributed to this field guide. And there's quite many. So we'll hand this around if you wanted to scan the code. Otherwise, I'll find the actual hard copy of the booklet, and please do take the time to read through and to benefit from the work that has gone into this guide as well. Thank you.
Putting the hard work, facilitating.
Just wait one moment. I'm Justine Emerson from the Environmental Defenders Office. And I'd also like to pay my respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging, and thank Uncle Bill O'Brien for his wonderful welcome to his country this morning. Okay, so in the Environmental Defenders Office, as many of you may be aware, is a specialist community legal centre that focuses on the protection of nature, climate, and country. We do this, we work with environmental organisations such as Lock the Gate and bushfire survivors, as well as community groups that are on the ground and individuals who are seeking advice on a public interest environmental issue. We also have a dedicated program to assist First Nations people seeking to protect country and culture. We do this through, I guess, three different programs. First is the early legal intervention program through strategic litigation and policy and law reform. So I know I've been asked to talk to strategic litigation, but I just want to speak very briefly about early legal intervention because that's the program that I work in. So that includes national intake, which I coordinate the national intake program. And that's a service that can provide free preliminary legal advice to anybody around Australia on a public interest environmental matter. We also have legal education. So that's where we can develop legal resources, run seminars, we have fact sheets, we do submission guides, for example, on a specific issue if it would benefit the community. And community outreach, where we can go into communities to raise awareness of an environmental issue and outline what people's legal rights are and how they might be able to address that particular issue. So the aim of the early legal intervention is really to empower communities through an understanding of what their legal rights are so they can participate in the decision-making process around planning decisions, what avenues are available to challenge those decisions, and we provide assistance to encourage people for people to encourage the regulator rather to enforce the law. So strategic litigation, has it moved the dial? Well, I guess the short answer is yes, but not fast enough. So EDO has been representing communities who are seeking climate action for the last 30 years. As far back as 1994, EDO represented Greenpeace against a case against the Red Bank Power Station, which was a case that established the way that decision makers should interpret principles of ecological sustainable development to include considerations of the climate impacts. As a result of subsequent cases, ecological sustainable development is now considered part of the public interest consideration, which is a mandatory requirement in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. And ESD is now interpreted as being broad enough to encompass climate considerations. So litigation can obviously overturn a bad decision or void an unlawful decision, but it can also raise awareness of an issue and highlight deficiencies in the law and that require law reform to enable to adequately address climate risk. So an example of a successful case that was run is the Rocky Hill coal mine case. And this was a landmark case because it was the first time that an Australian court refused a coal mine in part due to climate considerations. Those climate considerations were only came before the court because they were raised by EDO client Gloucester Groundswell. So I think it really highlights the benefits of providing representation to communities who are seeking to address climate impacts and the positive outcomes that can achieve. It's not just planning cases that EDO will work on either. So we also represent communities that are concerned about greenwashing. We have a corporate team that recently ran a case against Santos in relation to allegations of deceptive and misleading conduct around certain representations that were made about clean gas. Judgment in that matter is awaited eagerly. The bushfire survivors case is another really good example, I think, of a successful outcome where representation was provided to a group within the community that were directly impacted by climate related disaster, that being the catastrophic 2020 bushfires. Now, I'm not going to speak too much about this case because we're lucky enough to have Angela here, who will discuss it in greater detail. But the point I just wanted to make is, again, it's indicative of the positive outcomes that can be achieved where you provide access to justice to community. So that case, as a direct result of that case, so the group sought advice from EDO in relation to how the EPA could be compelled to develop climate change policy. And as a direct result of the outcome, in 2023, the EPA released 2 documents, being the Climate Change Policy and Climate Action Plan to measure and regulate greenhouse gas emissions in New South Wales. Another example is, it's actually a Queensland case, and Queensland planning law is somewhat different to New South Wales. So in this instance, the EDO client was Youth Verdict, that was a group of Indigenous and non-Indigenous young people who filed objections in the Land Court to a proposed coal mine on human rights grounds and biodiversity grounds. And it's noteworthy also to say that Queensland is one of 3 jurisdictions in Australia that has a Human Rights Act. As a result of that case, the court recommended to the minister that the coal mine be refused, and the minister accepted that decision and the mine didn't proceed. So again, the court found in relation to that particular matter that the climate scenario that was consistent with a viable mine would impose climate change risks that were, to Queensland people and property, that were unacceptable. And so the mine was refused. There's a couple of current cases that are being run, which again will be watched with interest. One is being heard at the moment in Queensland. And as with the Waratah case, an objection has been filed on behalf of ACF and the Mackay Conservation Council on both human rights and biodiversity grounds, opposing a greenfield coal mine, which will have a huge impact on climate over its lifetime. Another matter has just concluded, and it's a judicial review proceeding. So it was looking at the lawfulness of the approval of the environment plan for the Woodside gas project in Western Australia. And that was Doctors for the Environment were the client in that matter. So they're 2 matters that are on foot at the moment. But the reality is that whilst these cases have undoubtedly had an impact, achieving climate action through the law is really tough. So whilst, you can see from those cases, we now have consideration of climate impacts through planning law, and some projects have in fact been refused because of the climate impact. It's really difficult. Merit review rights in New South Wales have been significantly eroded, and communities are now only to make a application to challenge an approval of something like a coal mine in really, really limited circumstances. There's still no express requirement within the Planning Act itself in New South Wales to consider climate impacts. And courts have been really reluctant to find that governments owe their citizens a duty of care to protect against climate risk. We saw that in the Sharma decision and in the recent decision that was handed down by the Federal Court only last week in the matter of Pabai against the Commonwealth. In that particular matter, Justice Wigney, the Federal Court judge, he made the point that if judgment is to be passed in respect of the actions of government in respect of greenhouse gas emissions, then that judgment should be passed at the ballot box by those who are responsible for electing the governments, not the courts. And yet we continue to see this cognitive dissonance from lawmakers when they come out on the ground and see people who are impacted by these natural disasters, the platitudes they offer, and then the decisions they make back in the parliamentary chamber. We urgently need legislative reform to effect change at the speed that we need to do so. Because we know climate change is a social justice issue. We've heard directly from communities, and we can see that it disproportionately impacts certain communities. And some of those communities don't have the resources for adaptation and recovery. So community legal centres that are working with these communities are acutely aware of the economic and social cost of these climate-related disasters. EDO has expertise in planning and environment law and how they can potentially be addressed. We're really keen to collaborate with the sector to see how we can make these communities more resilient. So that was a speed through the strategic litigation, but yeah, I look forward to speaking with you after.
Thank you, everyone, so much for being here, and thank you for having me. I'm so incredibly honored to sit on this wonderful panel. My name is Angela Frimberger. I'm Government Relations Advisor with Bushfire Survivors for Climate Action. I gratefully live and work on this breathtaking, beautiful beer pie country with the greatest respect for the beer pie people and their elders and their ongoing connection to this gorgeous country. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Bushfire Survivors for Climate Action and our work. So Bushfire Survivors for Climate Action is a nonpartisan community of bushfire survivors, firefighters and their families, and the people who stand with them. We work by amplifying the voices of people who are affected by climate-fueled bushfires, to give those people a platform to use their stories in the way that they want to, in a trauma-informed way, to challenge the social license of fossil fuels, to advocate for stronger action on climate. And we bring the power of our network of these members and spokespeople to influence governments to act more effectively on climate change. Our vision is that Australia's political, legal, and planning systems will someday prioritize the safety and future of all Australian communities through urgent climate action and restoration. Our theory of change is that when bushfire survivors are supported to tell their stories and advocate for faster climate action, then politicians, governments, regulatory bodies, and the courts must acknowledge the human impacts of climate change, and that will result in increased climate ambition. So the case that Justine just mentioned before, that bushfire survivors brought with the support of the wonderful Environmental Defender's Office in 2021 in the New South Wales Land and Environment Court against the New South Wales Environment Protection Authority. The result of this case was that the court ordered that the EPA is to develop environmental quality objectives, guidelines, and policies to ensure environment protection from climate change. So what has happened since 2021? You might be wondering. As Justine mentioned, the New South Wales EPA released its climate change policy in early 2003 with a commitment to deliver on the EPA's statutory objectives and its duty to address climate change. So it's beautifully echoing the court order there. The climate change policy aims to adopt, support, and build on New South Wales government's overarching climate change objectives, which I'll come to in a moment, and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and make New South Wales more resilient and adapted to a changing climate. In 2023, the New South Wales EPA also released its Climate Change Action Plan 2023 to 2026, which outlines the specific actions. The New South Wales EPA Community and Environment Advisory Group began work last year, which is great. It was only a year after the mining and agriculture groups began work. And the New South Wales Guide for Large Emitters was released in February 2025. And this is the first document to actually lay out some actual requirements for large emitting projects to begin ratcheting down their emissions. In the broader New South Wales government, the New South Wales Climate Change Net Zero Future Act 2023 passed both houses of the New South Wales Parliament with multi-party support in November 2023. It includes excellent guiding principles, and it includes the emissions reduction targets that are currently legislated for New South Wales, which are 50% reduction on 2005 levels by 2030, 70% reduction by 2035, and net zero by 2050. These are definitely better than many other Australian jurisdictions. Unfortunately, because of delays to date, they are not adequate anymore in order to be able to have a good chance of keeping the 1.5 degree warming goal in view. We'll come back to that. The Act includes an objective for New South Wales to be more resilient to a changing climate. And importantly, it establishes the Net Zero Commission, which is an independent expert body to monitor, report, and advise on progress of these goals. So the Net Zero Commission began work last year and released its first report at the end of the year. Some of the key findings of that report were that the land sector has carried the bulk of emissions reductions so far in New South Wales, which is very helpful that it's done that work. However, its ability to continue to do more emissions reduction to hold further carbon emissions in the land sector is limited because there's only so much carbon that can be held in the land sector. And it's also uncertain because carbon held in the land sector, that's organic carbon in soil and plants, that's vulnerable to drought, bushfires. And so the role that the land sector plays is important, but it's limited. The report found that significant decarbonization is necessary in the electricity and energy sector. And another very key finding was that potential emissions increases associated with extended or expanded coal projects that are currently in the New South Wales planning pipeline may require other sectors to make greater emissions reductions. In other words, the resources sector is pulling the whole emissions reduction project down and shifting the load onto the other economic sectors in New South Wales. And the Commission plans to give deeper consideration of this sector in its next annual report, which is due late this year. The Narrabri coal case, I don't want to dwell on too much in the interest of time, but just to mention that this was another case that Bushfire Survivors for Climate Action brought with the support of the EDO. It was brought against Whitehaven and the New South Wales Planning Commitment. The case was unsuccessful, it was dismissed, but the highlight in the findings was that the Independent Planning Office, Independent Planning Commission, is being guided to greenlight coal projects by a document, the New South Wales Strategic Statement on Coal, which essentially privileges the coal industry in the state of New South Wales. So the outcome of this case highlighted the need to review that document. So where are we now? We have had a lot of really good policy work in the last few years since New South Wales versus EPA 2021. Really good policy work. Emissions reduction, we have not yet seen substantial emissions reduction as a result of that. The New South Wales EPA's climate action plan currently is 2023 to 2026, so that ends next year. We have an eye on that and hoping that there will be a subsequent action plan for, say, 2027 to 2029. All this time, the coal sector is continuing to receive approvals for further extensions and expansions. So where to next? Just was mentioning the review of the strategic statement on coal. This is, I feel, is a really important initiative because it seems to be the nub of what is guiding the Independent Planning Commission to give all these approvals for coal projects because it's privileging that particular industry. So that is actually meant to be underway and hopefully this year. There's another consultation that's currently live, and that's the Joint Standing Committee on Net Zero Future, running an inquiry into emissions from the fossil fuel sector. And I think that's a really important consultation as well. And clearly, Bushfire Survivors for Climate Action will be putting a submission into that consultation. Just before I finish up, I just wanted to highlight this one other question. Who should pay for the costs of climate disasters, for the costs of the immense amount of work that's needed to do on adaptation and resilience? It's everywhere we look. It's in our community infrastructure. There is so much work needed to adapt, become resilient, and recover from the impacts of climate change. It costs so much money. Where should that money come from? It's not fair, of course, because the problem is being caused in bulk by a particular industry, big coal, oil, and gas corporations, not only causing a problem, but receiving public subsidies while it's happening, paying little to no tax. There are findings that nurses and teachers pay more tax than fossil fuel corporations and sending these profits overseas so they don't benefit the Australian economy. Most people dramatically overestimate the contribution of fossil fuels to the Australian economy. It's about 3.5% to 4% in reality. And communities are bearing these immense costs, plus the day-to-day cost of living impacts on insurance, groceries, council rates, lost work time, energy costs. So just raising this as a question for consideration. And I just want to mention briefly that last year, 2 US states, Vermont and New York, put Climate Superfund Acts in place, which respond specifically to this question by saying the costs should be borne by the commercial corporations that are making profits causing these problems. And 11 more US states have moved similar measures. Lastly, quick call to action. Please read, sign, and share the Australian Bushfire Survivors Declaration. That QR code will take you to the declaration page, but please feel free to come over to me if you want more information about the organization or if you want to talk about it. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. I don't have a presentation. My name's George. I work for Lock the Gate Alliance. Some of you might know who we are, but for those who don't, Lock the Gate is a national organisation that supports communities that are struggling with the consequences of coal and unconventional gas mining. And we have grown, I've worked for Lock the Gate for most of the last 12 years, and we have grown from an extremely small outfit to now a sort of national charity. And we work in the Northern Territory, Queensland, New South Wales, and WA, fighting coal and unconventional gas. And my brief here really is to talk about what environmental organisations can offer climate affected communities. And we know a fair bit about that. I guess I'm not just here to kind of make an offer, but I'm also really interested in hearing, because so many of you work with communities that are affected by the consequences of climate change. Lock the Gate wants to dedicate some of our resources to helping communities meet the challenge of the turmoil that we're going through. And we want to do that partly because many people who work for our organisation or who are in communities that we already support have experienced in recent years, like many others, the consequences of climate change. And we know that it's going to get much, much worse, even if we stopped emitting everything tomorrow. There's a lot of change locked into the system. So we've decided we want to do this. And I guess to begin with, in terms of our contribution, a lot of it has to do with Lock the Gate's origins. So the phrase Lock the Gate essentially arose from landholders who refuse access to mining companies, both gas and coal companies, to their properties to do exploration for coal and gas, which is an act of civil disobedience in New South Wales and Queensland. So we have a fair bit of experience with direct action. And I do want to talk a little bit about direct action because I think a lot of people think of it as something that you get arrested doing as a protest, but you can get arrested doing something that isn't direct action, and you can do direct action that doesn't result in arrest. What direct action actually is, and I'm drawing on Murray Bookchin for this definition, is the unmediated intervention of people into affairs that are usually resolved by parliamentary debates and legislation. So federal court saying you've all just got to go and vote in 3 years' time, and that's how you're going to get climate justice. You've got to leave it to the parliament to do this, is what they're saying. So direct action is people saying, no, actually, we see that we can't just leave it to parliament. We need to directly intervene in public life and take control ourselves. And in our network, we have a fair degree of experience in this because we saw what happened in Lismore. And a great number of the people who got involved in Lismore Helping Hands after the first devastating record flood had already been involved in the network that successfully used direct action to see off the gas industry from that region. Gas-field-free Northern Rivers, over a period of only about 4 years, less, 3 years, it directly intervened in public life to declare the Northern Rivers region gas-field free. The government came in afterwards and formalised that decision, but it had already been made. They had already established that the region was going to be gas-field free. And so we are hoping that we can bring some of this character of direct intervention in public life to climate resilience for people who are basically, as Ellie referred to this morning, in situations where the proper authorities, the public purse, the normal channels are not available, are too stretched, no longer able to support people, kind of never were supporting people when it all boils down to it, as many of you I'm sure know. And how are we going to help communities in Australia step out of that passivity of saying, I need, where's the government? Why is the insurance company not here? Into how am I taking control of public affairs? How am I helping my own community? And essentially for us, that's what we think we have to offer. I guess too, there's a bunch of prerequisites that I feel like we, could probably talk about. The idea of direct action and direct democracy is really a statement of faith in public competence to do this stuff. We don't need experts to do this stuff. People already know what their communities need. People already have a range of skills, but we live in this society that has come to kind of assume that you need a certain kind of certificate or a title or a whole bunch of money in order to be the one who's allowed to staunch a wound or drive the boat to go and pick someone up when they need rescue or whatever it might be. So is a belief in the competence of people and the goodness of people is, I think, the first prerequisite. And then I think what environmental campaigning also brings to this is a sort of initiating spark. It's this getting over of the passivity to say, what if we just go out and do this and see what happens? And you do need a little bit of that initiating spark to kind of set the fire going in people's minds about actually what could we bring to this? What have we already got? What resources are we already bringing to our own rescue? I think there's also a great need for environmental organisations to help communities through the practice of group work and decision making and governance. A lot of people in Australia, much more so than compared to even 25 years ago, don't have skills in collective decision making, don't have skills in even how to negotiate and talk to each other. There's a lot of fractiousness on the ground in local areas, as I assume that most of you experience in your everyday lives. So that practice of how to talk to people and listen to them and make a decision together is, it's facilitation. It takes a lot of experience and practice to work through it, and it can be quite daunting to get into group work, and people don't do it for that reason because they think it's painful and dull. And finally, I think you inspired me to say this, particularly, Julia, with your intro. Environmental campaigning, so this has been my vocation, for 25 years, and there's a lot of us who have been climate advocates for a long time who are currently going through a very devastating experience of kind of coming to reckoning with our own failures of what we haven't been able to do, and we'll need to lean into how do we. And this is the same, I assume, in the community support sector. Not only are you going to be having to help people escape DV or, get whatever medical support they need, you're also now dealing with climate change. And it's the same for us. We're still advocating, as Angela laid out, for action to reduce the scale of climate change, but we're now also needing to lean in to support people to deal with its consequences. And I think to the thing that campaigning kind of brings, I think, to the space is a sense of drama. So, there's a whole bunch of people that you guys know who, if you tallied up all of the cost that you have spent supporting people dealing with the insurance crisis, which is gripping the disaster-affected areas of New South Wales and Queensland, you could release it in a big report and say, who owes us this money? BHP owes us this money. BHP is responsible for like 2% of the greenhouse gas emissions currently accumulated in the atmosphere around the globe. So 2% of that bill goes straight to BHP. So campaigning is a way to, I guess, kind of dramatize and bring a sense of, possibility to a situation that feels kind of stultified and impossible. And I think when you look around, and again, Ellie's presentation was really excellent for this, you can see some of this spirit already unfolding. And when the fires were gripping New South Wales in the end of 2019 and beginning of 2020, it was very striking to me how communities that already had a sense of working alongside each other and had been through some of these direct action experiences that are really personally transformative, and had forged relationships were the ones who kind of pushed through and were able to kind of step into that, and now we have to do this. And so I guess just to leave you with what other kinds of direct action, might be required or interesting to emerge in the next few years that the community legal centres could contribute to is like, obviously there's already DIY rescue going on. And Ellie spoke about how people are kind of pushing the boundaries for the fire service and the SES because they have a lot of, administrative and governance requirements that constrain their activities. And the home repair, but maybe insurance, like a DIY community insurance pool. What would that look like? Like a strike fund, to support people because the community knows it's going to face a disaster. Let's build up a fund so that there can be we don't have to work for 2 weeks, because we've got this strike fund, this community DIY insurance fund, and conflict resolution, of course, and the all important welfare and psychological support. So I think that's really where I think that environmental groups can assist. I don't know how much time I've got, Julia, but I will just say we are finding it fairly challenging in Lock the Gate to initiate community resilience work in areas where there isn't a sense of emergency. There's a sort of a really broad sense that, yes, this is important. Yes, this is good. I agree. But that initiating spark, it's hard to manufacture that out of nothing. And it's almost as if people need to go through some sort of shakedown in order to emerge into that, which I hope isn't the case because I wouldn't wish that on people. But if you have ideas, please let me know because we really are keen to do it. And I was talking to Kudra earlier about the other thing I think that not-for-profits can do, and I'm talking to our sector about this, is run our organisations in a way that make more space for people to deal with the realities of, a collapsing society. So enabling people to take time off to care for people, working a lot, shorter weeks so that they can spend time. We've just brought someone onto our staff and she came to us because she wanted to only work 4 days so she could do work in her local community on resilience, their bushfire threatened area. So that's me.
That's it. Perfect. Amazing. So I started off with a bit of a doom and gloom question for us all. I'm not going to promise that we've found the silver bullet just yet. But in the question of how do we move the needle, we've heard about an incredible collaboration in Victoria that resulted in the Climate Justice Field Guide. That is now a resource, a tool that services can use across Australia. We've heard about incredible strategic litigation, lawyers, which actually results in incredible change, actual changes to the law, and we've heard about the actual direct action communities getting right at the front lines of this stuff. But we also heard that it's not enough and it's not fast enough and it hasn't prevented us from crossing into 1.5 degrees, and it's going to get worse. So it's not resolved, but I actually think you have to take inspiration from the work that is being done, that is in fact elevating us from just helping one person at a time to actually like Catcher in the Rye style. Like we have to stop people falling off the cliff. And I think we might need some little mickeys so that I can ask these guys some questions and we don't have to keep getting in each other's way. But I'm going to leave you with this analogy that I found really helpful for myself, and Dr. Georgina just mentioned it, because people who've cared a lot about climate change and climate action and trying to prevent this terrible outcome. Imagine being on a giant sailboat, right? You've got all the people working on the boat, all doing their little jobs and pulling their ropes and stuff. It's a lot of work, and there is a storm on the horizon, and everyone on the boat sees it, and they are working together as hard as they can to turn that ship to avoid the storm. But now we're in the storm, And that completely changes the game, right? You still have to pull all the ropes and pulleys, and you still have to sail the boat, and you're still trying to get out of the storm, and you're still trying to move that boat away from the worst of it. But you're in it now. We're in it now. It makes the job harder and more urgent and more real. And the rain's in our face, and it makes it really scary. But that's where we're at. Like, we are in the storm now, and we have to keep doing the work, the legal work, the long tail, complex, messy legal work of helping people after an event. But we're doing it inside the storm now.
Julie, can I respond?
Yeah, please.
So I agree with you, but I think there's a flip side to that, which is there's a lot of things that I'm sure all of you have been facing that are like systemic barriers to justice in your communities. And we are now in a time when the system is falling to pieces, which is actually an invitation to sweep aside those systemic barriers and do some world building from the ground up and make something much, much better. So I agree, it's really scary, but I don't resile from how bad it is, because I know a lot about how bad it is and people don't know. But it's also like, oh, okay, the revolution is here. The world is actually changing. How am I going to work inside that change to make something so much more beautiful and special and exciting as well as scary?
Build a better boat. So I've got a couple of questions for the panel. I might just bring it right down to the CLC nerdy, dorky level of the new Access to Justice partnership. So there is now a new priority client group in the new Access to Justice partnership of clients affected by natural disaster. So, this isn't new stuff. Y'all have been doing this work. We have been helping these people for years, but now we get to count them. Right now we get to track them as a priority group. We're going to keep helping them. But, same question. Is that going to move the dial, right? Just counting them, keeping track of them. Is that going to change anything? So I guess my question to the panel here is, we have to collect this data now. We have to focus on it in kind of a new way. We get credit for it. But what do we do with it? How do CLCs use this new data to feed into the bigger picture?
So shall I start with that one?
Do it.
Okay. I love data. I am such a nerd. I'm a lawyer who lawyers with her heart, but I love the collection of data because it informs where we go. And it also gives us a standing point because we can point to this. It's real, it's tangible, and we can create change with that. And you're right, we've been collecting data for eons, and what does it really mean? I know the lack of it and what that means as well. So when I'm looking at the people that we're servicing, and I'm missing things where things are unknown, that doesn't help us. But if we can bring everybody together on this journey and we can learn from the people that we're assisting and to continue to learn, then we can continue to try to create that change. And I agree, it's not about building a boat from scratch. It's about taking that experience that we garnish over the years and then making something that's much better. And if that means ticking another box and counting a few more priority areas, then I actually think that's a good thing.
In response to that, I mean, I think, yes, data is really useful, but speaking as an environmentalist, we have been collecting data about the collapse of the environment for 30 years. And we've been collecting data about social and economic disadvantage for a long time as well. And the information itself does not change anything. And a lot of people, I think, in climate change thought that the information would be sufficient to make the change, and it's not. So I would say take your data and campaign with it. And you have to strike the balance between honouring the individual people who are actually going through the intense experiences. So don't be, a top-down transactional bastard about it, but get their consent and participation to actually go, we recognise that just telling the government that people are suffering is not going to change the situation.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I can think of another use for the data as well. First, I just wanted to say that on climate justice, moving the dial, I mean, you people are moving the dial because those people need care, and care is access to justice. So by providing that, yes, you definitely are moving the dial. In terms of uses for data, I think now that, referring back to my last slide when I raised the question of, who should pay for this? And George mentioned, well, you know, who do we send the bill to? We total up that big bill, and we send 2% of it to a specific corporation. Well, the data that you're going to be collecting is going to feed into that bill as well. So that's really important that we understand the absolute full extent of the scale of the problem. All the corners that climate change reaches into need to be accounted for.
I'll just make one very brief comment, because following the Rocky Hill decision that I mentioned earlier, I was really excited. I thought, this is great. This is going to change the way that decisions about the approval of coal mines were being made. But it hasn't, because consent authorities, when they're considering these projects, they prioritise the perceived short-term economic benefits of jobs, etc., and they're not building in the very real costs associated with these climate-related disasters. So, as the point has been made, the data, if it can be used to actually demonstrate the economic costs as well as the social costs, but sometimes money talks, to the government and say that we urgently need legislative change to address these issues and build that cost into these decisions that are being made to continue to approve fossil fuel projects.
That's good. Thank you. Now I'm going to throw a big challenge at you. I would like each of you, and I'll do it myself too, give us one big move the dial project that you think should be happening right now. Like, how do we start to move it? And I'll start, and I'll throw out in the insurance space. As I said, I'm a real insurance tragic. The Insurance Council of Australia, who's not always my best friend, they have actually put forward a giant flood prevention plan that's going to cost $30 billion over the next 10 years. And I think it is a game changer. I think it is such a good idea. I support it. I've been supporting it publicly with ministers. Everyone's talking about $30 billion is too much. It's not too much. It's like barely scratching the surface, and it's only for one peril. It's just for flood. But it's a start. They've costed it out. They've modeled it. They've talked about how it could work, sharing the cost with industry, with states. It's always good to have insurers as your buddies, because if insurers and consumers team up, seems like a no-brainer to me. And I started using this as an American. I had this real reaction where I was like, oh, it's like the space race. We need to just lean in. And then my colleague Drew was like, no one knows about the space race like Americans. It's not the same impact as you think it is. I've done this pivot to like using the snowy hydro scheme as a good example. Because when we built I'm a dual citizen. When we built the snowy hydro scheme in Australia, there was only 8 million Australians. And in today's dollars, it costs $6 billion to build. And it is still considered an engineering marvel of the modern world. It's still looked at as a marvel, not Snowy 2. Snowy 1, let's just be clear. But, it took 40 years. It was a marvel. It is still looked at in that way as a model of how to do a gigantic scheme like that. This would be the same. This could be the model for the world. The world is dealing with these same insurance and changing climate problems. So to me, $30 billion when there's only 28 million Australians, it's the same ratio. We need to lean in. This stuff is going to cost money. It's been modeled out. Let's just do it. So I've been pushing hard in Parliament for that to get progressed. So that's my move the dial one. And now you each have to do one.
I think probably, absolutely, we just need to set science-based emission targets for 2035. So that's something that we can all push for, but that sounds a little boring, doesn't it? I do think that making polluters pay is probably a game-shifting initiative. It's something that is looking promising in terms of both, again, providing reparation to people who've been impacted, but also bringing home the reality of the full costs of the fossil fuel industry and its pollution, is hopefully going to allow legislators and policymakers and the people who vote for them to actually understand the reality of what we're working with if we put it in dollars.
So I don't want to lose sight of the people who are most impacted, and they're the people who have experienced disaster and have so much to give and to share. So I'm wanting to be in everybody's faces. I want to join with people who know this work, who can really create some change, to talk to the decision makers, to change the laws, all that, the big stuff that will matter. But again, I don't want to lose sight of the people who are most impacted in our disaster communities, and to continue to share their learnings.
Yeah, I'd second that. I think that there's real opportunities, as I mentioned earlier. So the Environmental Defenders Office has expertise in how to use the law to address these problems. We need a multi-pronged approach. The law has its limitations. We need legislative change. But I do think there's real opportunities for the CLC sector and with the environment movement generally to really work together and identify that these are climate-related disasters and ensure that the community that is impacted by that is aware of that they're identifying as victims of climate disasters. And we will hold those people that are in power accountable for the decisions that they're making that continue to exacerbate rather than contribute to resolving these problems. I'm not suggesting that Australia can do it alone. Clearly we can't. But we're a wealthy country with one of the highest per capita emissions. We have a moral obligation to address it now.
I think the most exciting thing is, I guess I'm just interested in breaking out of the pattern of asking the government to do something and they've very clearly said they're not going to. And the federal court last week in the Pabai case said, sort of reiterated that pattern. So I think that the shifting change, I think, is citizens and collectives going directly at the corporate sector for the money somehow. And there have been cases, I'm sure there are lawyers working on this, but bypass government and go straight to the ones who cause the harm. There is attribution science, much further progressed than it ever used to be before. And that great Peruvian farmer case, one of the lawyers will know the name of, where he got money out of a German energy company recently, for the very cost on him of climate change. And so I think just change where the center of gravity is. So it's not kind of us pleading with our representatives to do something different when they've really clearly said they're not going to, but actually going, no, we're going to do this. And if you want to come talk to us about what solutions we've got to offer, once we've changed the landscape, then, here's my number kind of thing.
So I might just open it up now. Why not? Would love to hear it if anyone has moved the dial ideas from your communities, or if you have questions for the panel. We've got a bit of time before lunch. Yeah, we'll start with Mark Holden.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, not a fan of SEP's SSD, to be honest, especially when it comes to considerations under the under the Environmental Assessment Act. I just want to ask as well. There was a ICJ ruling that was handed down today and reported by the Climate Council, which shows not only Australia's commitment to fixing climate change, but also as well their responsibility for compensation to other countries for causing that. That includes not just production in Australia, but also exports overseas. I was just wondering if you guys had any comments about that.
Go for it.
Yeah, there's a big movement internationally and a lot of thought being put into climate reparations internationally. And the ICJ ruling was much anticipated as sort of one of the foundational steps that will enable the small island developing states and other least developed countries to get more, to get reparations. And, the establishment through the UNFCCC of a loss and damage mechanism, quite recently was also another foundational step towards that. So the body of law is being built up, but I would just reiterate my comment, which is I think we've thought about this as a problem that nation states are the proper authority to deal with. And I just I'm very interested in kind of breaking out of that. All power to Vanuatu, keep on pursuing that agenda, and I hope they keep succeeding. But for us, it's like, how do we undermine this sort of stultification that says it's only a state, a government that is able and competent to deal with this? because they kind of keep on saying that they're not prepared to. And my big concern about the reparations movement is that the money will very soon run out, because like all the governments, even the rich governments, are going to just be spending so much money responding to climate change. So we've got a pretty narrow window where there is still oodles of money kind of swashing around. Yeah, so hopefully that's.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Mark.
Sorry. Just really quickly, I'm just noting as well the anti-protest laws that have been put in place in New South Wales. What has been the damage and how it stops protests, and has there been any traction on trying to get it changed?
Well, you will know that ADO led a challenge to those laws. I can't speak directly to that case. I wasn't involved, but I think perhaps the environmentalists are better placed to see how it's impacted their movements. But there was an attempt to challenge it, and in part, I think the scope of it was reduced to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing the early steps of the system trying to sandbag and defend itself against, what is really now just the era of turmoil. And it's, I think, quite related to the UK government's recent move to list Palestine Action, a group that are basically anti-war, as a terrorist organization. So people can't support them anymore without risking jail. And this is going to keep on happening. And it's the same sort of problem where community will have to come up with its own mechanisms to defend and protect each other, because we have a kind of status quo essentially doing a sandbagging exercise and saying, we are going to come down harder and harder and harder on you if you are, stepping outside the bounds of your defined powers.
Good answer.
I was just going to jump back to exports for 1 second, which was the first question, just on exports. And I think that many people might not be aware of the preponderance of Australia's emissions that come from exported fossil fuels versus domestic use. And I just wanted to take a moment to highlight that in terms of exported emissions, that Australia is actually second only to Russia in the world, in not just per capita, but absolute size of exported emissions. And another really powerful item that I just learned last week, actually earlier this week, was that of Australia's domestic gas use, 80% of the gas that's burned domestically is burned by the gas industry to liquefy its product for export.
Ugh.
And that is why there's a perceived gas shortage in Australia. And that is why gas is so expensive to Australians. So I just wanted to share that with the group.
Yes, please.
Hi, I have a question for Angela and Justine, I suppose, whoever feels good to answer it. It was just about how community groups can gain standing for strategic litigation. Like maybe you can speak to how you guys were able to gain standing for the cases you were involved with, or generally how they get that nexus of connection to be able to actually do something like that.
Well, it depends on the nature of the action that's to be taken. So there is open standing under the Protection of Environment Operations Act for any person to bring proceedings to enforce a breach of an environmental law. There's also open standing under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, again, to enforce a breach of that law. What the difficulty is and where it's limited is that merit review rights are only available for a certain category of development, which is designated development, and only then when a public hearing hasn't been held. So if the government elects to have a public hearing for that particular project, it extinguishes objector merit review rights. It's then the only avenue available is through judicial review, which, all the lawyers in the room would be aware of the limitations of judicial review. You've got to identify an error of law. And even if you are successful, sometimes that error can be remedied and the decision remade, and then off they go again. So the erosion of community participation rights is a real issue. And I think it's something that EDO has continued to advocate for, that the community should have the opportunity to participate in the decision-making process. There should be merit appeal rights available to community members, particularly on these really big impact projects, because I think the cases that I outlined before highlight the benefits of where the community does have the opportunity to participate in this. I think one of the biggest challenges, and I'm probably jumping ahead because I think that's a question to come, but is dealing with the influence of the fossil fuel sector and the development lobby and the huge amount of influence that they hold over those processes. So, there's this constant argument to get rid of community views and opportunities to challenge the project. So hopefully that's answered it for you.
Yeah, don't be silenced.
Don't be silenced, exactly. But I think that's why it's really important, and access to justice through services like the community legal sector, because it is that opportunity for people to at least have an understanding the way the law operates, which, it's part the way there, even if it's just an understanding of the deficiencies. And to be honest, a lot of the advice that I give to people through the national intake line is don't waste your time. Go out and advocate, put your resources and your energies and your effort into campaigning, because you're likely to get a better result than if you get bogged down in the legal process that may not ultimately deliver the result that you're seeking.
Yeah, that would probably be the only thing that I would have to add, is that from the perspective of a small nonprofit, that the amount of background work and the time and resources that go into strategic litigation is really immense. It's so much more than it would appear from 2 slides. And I think that, consult with an expert and, really think about it before jumping in. It can really, really be valuable, but it's a big project. And to continue to use the other avenues.
Anybody else? Yeah. I may or may not ask that question.
Thanks. I just want to chime in because I did neglect to say, and I want to reinforce what George has been saying. So Gasfield-free Northern Rivers was definitely a precursor to Resilient Lismore. There is a direct correlation there between the work that our community did to resist gas fields and the work that we currently do for community resilience. The Northern Rivers Resilience Alliance is a direct historical link back to the Gasfield-free Northern Rivers Alliance. So I just wanted to make that clear and acknowledge our origin story and the great work that Lock the Gate does in creating self-determined communities that are willing to really step up into the fray and see that there are gaps and the things to do to it. And I apologise that this is a comment, not a question, but the other thing I just wanted to flag in terms of tracking data for climate impacted folks that you're working with, there's a new initiative called How We Survive, running out of University of Sydney, that has like 40 years of research funding. And I love research. I have a love-hate relationship with researchers, to be totally honest. But maybe that's something that you can connect into to try to put some of that data into it. But yeah, just really solid flag waving for self-determined communities and whatever we can do to support them.
Love it. We'll call that your move the dial idea. So
yeah, exactly. It's flip the switch, put
Yeah.
the resourcing into the communities, less money into top down, fly in, and how do we resource communities to really step up and lead and build their own new frameworks.
Love that. Any more audience questions? Oh yeah, we've got. Okay.
Strategic litigation in the federal court and high court is incredibly important, but don't forget the impact of strategic litigation of making an AFCA complaint every 30 seconds to make the cost of doing insurance work badly really expensive. So, it's not just about large scale strategic litigation, it's also about small, endless, death by 1,000 cuts. Sorry.
Crucial. That's a really crucial insight, because so many of the big cases fail and make bad law as they fail, whereas being a total headache at the local level for the companies means that they go to the government and say, can you please fix this problem? We've got people suing us. Perfect.
I've got another question here that I might ask, and then Mark, I'll let you ask a third question. So given the urgency, given that we're in the storm and we're quickly trying to rebuild our boat while in the storm, I'm interested in what you all see as the biggest challenge as we keep working towards climate justice?
I can start. There's probably many things that you could say, but for us, what we want to do is, well, we don't want to drop the ball. And what we see through disasters is you do all the work, you get to a point, you've got this great understanding of how you can go forward, and then there's a bit of a lull in the storm, and then the next disaster happens and up we go again. And we see that with the funding that we have in the community legal sector. We've just lost our funding. We've lost staff for disaster relief, and we've lost staff who had built up a significant, wealth of experience and knowledge. So for us, like, just keep it up there. Like, let's not drop it and keep like this. Let's just try to grow from what we know.
Love that. Anyone else?
Well, I think I think the big challenge is like managing the sort of nested personal and then family and then community and then regional national kind of sense of crisis and despair and, just emotional collapse, to be honest, because I don't think most people I know that most people in Australia have absolutely no idea how bad this is going to be quite quickly, and it will quite quickly lead people into just like a paralysis. And so I think that, I don't want to be really negative, and I think, to me, the way to address that challenge is to act in ways that aren't, I guess, reinforcing systems that are refusing to move, because that is the pathway towards more paralysis and despair. And to just keep the eye on the joy and the liberation and the possibility, because I guess in Lock the Gate we have learned a lot. We win a lot of campaigns, but we have lost a lot of campaigns as well. But the campaigns that we've lost, we've undertaken in such a way that it actually just has enriched all of our lives, the people who have participated in it, so much that it was worth doing, even though we didn't get where we wanted to be in the end. And you're glad you did it. And I think a lot of campaigning and a lot of advocacy and reform work that people do, they get to the end and they go, well, that was a complete waste of time because we failed. So doing it in a way that creates the goodness regardless of the outcome is, I think, the challenge.
Good.
Wow, that's so inspiring. Yeah, I think in a way, some of the challenge was summed up in the Pabai decision last week, when the judge actually, said to the applicants that the judge encouraged them to protest. And at a time when anti-protest laws are being made, and also made that observation that Justine showed on her slide about that this is something that we need to take to the ballot box. And the ballot box is great, but it's limited. And I think finding ways to realize greater action in between elections, but also, how do we get more effective on climate election results? And that requires communicating to the broad swath of the population. So a lot of what we think about at Bushfire Survivors for Climate Action is actually communicating about climate change. And it's tricky because we don't want to sugarcoat it. People need to know that it's very serious or they're not going to worry about it. But you also don't want to push people into paralysis with the seriousness of it. It's quite frustrating. I mean, for many years, the climate movement has been, sort of communicating by, show a positive vision and, don't talk about doom and gloom, talk about, how wonderful it's going to be when everything's renewable. And, that felt nice, but where has it gotten us? And now, do we want to be thumping on tables and saying, I'm not going to say that out loud. So that's, the challenge is really finding the balance. And I think it is that there is no one right way to communicate about climate change, but then that means that we need to communicate in many different ways. And that takes a lot of resources. So that's what I see as the challenges.
I guess I'll just reiterate the comment that I made earlier. I think it's the disproportionate influence that a relatively small group, the fossil fuel sector, the development lobby, have over the political processes and decision making. But I feel quite inspired coming together with you all, because I think that by empowering the community, and we can rebalance those scales and ensure that it's the public interest that is first and foremost reflected in the decisions that are being made.
All right, final call out. Oh yeah, Trish.
I'm just curious to know your thoughts on, you've all touched on this in different ways. And I've been sitting here just thinking myself, I think Georgina, you mentioned it first, and Alison, you mentioned it as well. We're collecting data. We all sit in different pockets, bushfire, flood, some of them intersect, some don't. We all have our own experiences in our different centres and our different regions. We struggle in those regions that are really hard hit to get through to community, to get them to act. They're in different stages of their recovery process. Some aren't ready to stand up and act, some are. So in the centres where they're hardest hit, when it's hard to get community to come together and stand up and take action, how then do we come together in the sector, all of us with the same end goal, to spread the word to the whole of Australia? Because people think we've all moved on. 3.5 years later in Lismore and the Northern Rivers, there's still houses that are not rebuilt. There's people still living in caravans on their front lawn or in tents. Oh, really? So how do we come together to get that groundswell, to get the spark, to ignite that? Because if the courts are sitting there saying you've got to take it to the ballot boxes, and we rely on that, we're never getting anywhere, because the mass of Australia don't understand. So where does that leave us? And I mean, no one's got the answer, I suppose, but collectively, how do we come together to try and get the answer to that, or to spread the word and to make a difference?
Thank you. I absolutely hear you. And I see it in our communities that you can't just check in and check out. And you would know that as well in your area. What we know from the people that we've been working with is the importance of place-based assistance. And we hear that all the time through our evaluation work. You know, people saying, you know, you're just going to leave us. You know, this is hot now, but then you're going to walk away. So we need to show that we're not going to do that, which is really hard when we've got these really poor funding cycles where that's exactly what happens. And as a community legal service, like, we're forever trying to be creative to do the work that we know really has the most impact and to target those communities most in need. So how do we keep doing that to reassure the community that we're not just going to check out and, you know, go to the next bucket of cash or whatever it is we need to do? And I think I just had a really good experience recently where I told a client story, and it was a client who was impacted by the bushfires, and then just had so many matters that just rolled around her and continued to roll through. And I could probably name, you know, 6, 7, 8 different types of legal issues. And we're talking 5 years down the track, and she's still struggling to get a roof over her head, you know, following an abusive separated relationship. The reason I'm telling this story is because it actually resonated. So when I sat in a room with another 50 of my colleagues in Victoria with the Attorney General, and I told this story, it had real and a real meaningful impact, I believe. So it's not the answer. There's many, you know, there's all different parts of this, and there's a way that we need to work with our specialist services as well, and indeed other organisations who can keep up the chant with us. But I think it's just, you know, showing that we're true when we're honest, and we'll keep telling that story.
Isn't that the $1 million question? How do we do it? But I think that by collaboration, and, you know, you on the front line have got the stories, which can sometimes, and the data. So how can we collaborate to achieve better results for our communities and make them more resilient? I think that's something that I'm really, really interested in from the perspective as a specialist centre with the, you know, environmental planning law. How can we connect with the people that you're working with who quite frankly, sometimes lack the resources to reach out to us directly because they're dealing with, issues around housing, unemployment, discrimination. Climate change action is not necessarily the first thing on their minds. So yeah, exactly. So how do we liaise with the community sector broadly and other not-for-profits and environmental groups, so we can collectively collaborate and all bring the skill set that we've got to advocate for these communities with their stories, their data.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Ellie, is there a national organisation, not-for-profit advocacy organisation on adaptation and resilience? No, this is the thing. I think part of the thing is actually not I hesitate to suggest setting up an organisation, but like there's services, and there's advocacy organisations in climate, but they've always been rather squeamish about talking about adaptation because it's interpreted as a sort of a
Giving up.
And it was actually taboo to talk about adaptation. Like obviously, the developing countries have been doing it for a long time, and the aid organisations have been doing it for a long time. But it was a bit like, don't even now, people react when you kind of go, oh well, we need to work on responses, and so there isn't that voice that can kind of not require you to go and carve out your time, but can actually get the information from you, get the stories, and do that platform that Lock the Gate did on mining and extraction, that other organisations have done on nature conservation or child welfare or whatever it is. We don't really have that in climate change adaptation and resilience as yet. And I'm trying to make the case in our circles in philanthropy as well as in climate advocacy to say advocating on adaptation and resilience helps the mitigation campaigning because people don't know, as you say, like people don't know how hard it is still in Lismore after, these several years after the flood, and to drive home for them the necessity of mitigation, to tell the stories of the affected communities is to make the case for the 2035 targets or whatever else it is that we're trying to get. So I think sounds like there's something in the works over there. She said not yet.
No pressure.
Taken up a role on the Community Council for Place. You're probably aware of Place Partnerships for Local Action and Community Empowerment. And whilst it's not climate resilience or adaptation, I think it's kind of going there with the place-based community development model in order to build strength. So yes, not yet in the actual disaster climate impact, but I feel like Place might be leaning into that community first narrative, or that's what I'll be pushing them to do anyway.
I might also point out the work of the Resilient Building Council. They're amazing. Kate Cotter's the founder of that little not-for-profit, and they have a free bushfire resilience app that any homeowner in Australia can download, and it will help you figure out exactly what is your star rating for bushfire resilience, and then give you exact tips on what you can do to make your house more resilient. And they are expanding that to multi-perils, so flood, hail, everything. And they're hoping to get to this place if they could get funding, where they can basically give you a star rating on the resilience of your home against any peril. And then they can help you figure out a way to do that work and then get it verified by an actual builder. And then you can give that certificate to your insurer and get a discount. I mean, that's the dream. All right. Well, I'm the boss of this panel. So I might just say that that's the end of the questions. I'm going to leave you with the challenge that we have this new priority client group. And I would say if you are marking down a client as being inside this priority group, it is incumbent on you to ask them permission to tell their story, see if they're willing to do media, see if they're willing to send you pictures of how their life has been destroyed, because it's the visuals of people living in caravans 3 years later that tells the rest of Australia that this is real and it's present. And these people are coming to us all the time. They are talking to us every day. So it's up to us to do do that extra bit of work to say, and can I tell your story? And, can you send me some pictures? And would you do media if we call you back? Can you thank my beautiful Burgundy panel? And thank you for coming, and go have some lunch. Easy.